You woke up this morning, and before your eyes were even fully open, you reached for your phone. You did not decide to do that. You did not sit up, stretch, take a breath, and then consciously choose to pick up a glowing rectangle and scroll through the lives of strangers. You just did it. Your hand moved before your mind was even present. And if someone asked you right now why you did it, you would probably say something like, "I don't know, I just always do." And that, right there, that single moment of unconscious, automatic, unquestioned behavior, that is exactly what Osho spent decades talking about. That is what he meant when he said, with absolute conviction, that most human beings are not really living. They are simply running a program. Now, before you dismiss that as the ramblings of a controversial mystic, stay with this for a moment. Because what Osho was pointing to is not some abstract spiritual concept. It is something deeply practical, something that science has actually begun to confirm, something that you can verify in the quiet corners of your own life if you are willing to look honestly. And when you truly see it, it changes everything. Osho used the word robot deliberately, not as an insult, not as a condemnation, but as a description. A robot is a machine that responds to inputs with predictable outputs. You press a button, it performs a function. It does not ask why. It does not pause to reflect. It does not wonder if there is a different way. It simply executes its programming over and over and over again with perfect mechanical efficiency. And Osho looked at the average human life and said, with both sadness and a strange kind of compassion, that this is what most of us have become. Think about the shape of a typical human day. The alarm goes off. The coffee is made. The same route is driven to the same place, where the same tasks are performed, and the same conversations are had, and then the same route home, the same dinner, the same television, the same scroll through the phone, the same restless half-sleep. And then it begins again. Day after day after day, year after year after year, decade after decade. And somewhere in the middle of all of this repetition, a life passes. And the terrifying thing, the thing Osho kept pointing to, is that most people do not notice. They are too busy running the program to notice that they are running a program. But how does this happen? How does a human being, born with an extraordinary capacity for awareness, for creativity, for genuine aliveness, how does such a being end up living like a machine? Osho had a very specific answer, and it begins not with adulthood, not with failure or trauma or bad choices, but with the very first years of life. When a child is born, it arrives as pure potential. There is no programming yet. There is no social mask, no inherited belief system, no deeply grooved habit of responding to the world in one particular way. The child is raw, open, present, alive. Watch a very young child and you will see what Osho meant by consciousness. They are completely here. A falling leaf holds their entire attention. A stranger's smile fills them with joy. A sudden noise startles them fully and genuinely. They are not thinking about yesterday or worrying about tomorrow. They are simply, totally, undividedly here. And this, Osho said, is our natural state. This is what we are when we have not yet been conditioned. But then the world gets to work. And the world does not do this out of cruelty. It does this out of survival, out of efficiency, out of the well-meaning desire of every generation to pass on what it has learned to the next. Parents tell the child what is acceptable and what is not. Schools reward certain responses and punish others. Religion defines what is holy and what is sinful. Society draws the lines of what is normal, what is weird, what is successful, what is shameful. And the child, being utterly dependent on these adults and institutions for survival, both physical and emotional, the child learns to comply. The child learns to suppress what is frowned upon and amplify what is rewarded. The child learns to become a version of itself that fits the mold. Osho called this the false self, the persona, the social mask. And he was very clear about something that most people find uncomfortable. By the time this process is complete, by the time a person has been fully shaped by their family, their culture, their religion, their education, they have almost entirely forgotten who they actually are. They have been so thoroughly programmed that they experience the program as themselves. They think the mask is the face. And here is where it gets deeply strange. Because the person running this program, the person who wakes up every morning and goes through the motions and reacts to the world in the same predictable ways, this person genuinely believes they are making choices. They believe they are living freely. They have never looked closely enough to notice that almost every thought they think, every preference they feel, every reaction they have, every belief they hold, almost all of it was installed by someone else, long before they were old enough to examine it, long before they had the tools to question whether it was actually true. You believe certain things about yourself because you were told those things when you were small and impressionable. You want certain things in life because you were shown those things were worth wanting. You react with anger or fear or shame in specific situations because those reactions were conditioned into you through years of repetition and reinforcement. And you carry all of this inside you, not as received programming, but as yourself, as your personality, as who you are. And this is the robot Osho was describing. Not a robot made of metal and circuits, but a robot made of inherited beliefs, conditioned reactions, unconscious habits, and borrowed desires. A robot that believes it is free because it has never examined its own chains. Now Osho did not stop at diagnosis. He went further, into the mechanics of how this robot operates. And one of the things he pointed to most consistently was the role of the mind in maintaining the illusion of freedom. The human mind, Osho observed, is almost never quiet. It is almost never simply here, in the present moment, experiencing what is actually happening. Instead, it is almost always somewhere else. It is replaying conversations that happened years ago. It is rehearsing conversations that may never happen. It is worrying about the future in elaborate and exhausting detail. It is lost in fantasies, in regrets, in plans, in grievances, in dreams. The body is here, walking down a street, washing dishes, sitting in a meeting, but the mind is almost always somewhere else entirely. And Osho said this is not accidental. This is the nature of the conditioned mind. The conditioned mind is always comparing the present moment to the past, always judging whether this moment is acceptable or not based on standards that were installed long ago. It is always measuring the self against some ideal, always finding itself insufficient in one way or another. And this incessant, restless, compulsive mental activity keeps a person so occupied, so endlessly distracted, that they never actually arrive in their own life. They live their entire life at one remove, watching it through the foggy glass of their own mental commentary. This is why, Osho pointed out, people can look back at years and decades of their lives and feel as though they do not really remember living them. They remember events, certainly. They remember facts and dates and faces, but they do not remember truly being there. They were not truly there. They were in their head, running the program, while life unfolded around them like a film they were watching but not inhabiting. And then there is the question of desire. This is one of the most powerful ways the robot operates, and Osho spoke about it with great precision. Most human beings spend the majority of their waking lives in a state of wanting. Wanting what they do not have. Wanting to become what they are not. Wanting circumstances to be different from what they are. And this wanting is not freely chosen. It is programmed. It is the operating system running underneath everything else. You want the bigger house because you were shown that the bigger house means success. You want the particular kind of body because culture has told you relentlessly that this particular body is the worthy one. You want the approval of specific kinds of people because your early experiences taught you that approval from these people means safety, means belonging, means worth. You want experiences, objects, relationships, achievements, not because your deepest self has genuinely chosen them, but because the program has calculated that they will produce a reduction in the background anxiety that runs through a conditioned life. And here is the cruel mathematics of it all, the part that Osho returned to again and again with almost ruthless clarity. The robot is always chasing satisfaction that never quite arrives. It gets the thing it wanted, and for a brief moment the wanting subsides, and there is a flicker of relief that gets mistaken for happiness. And then, almost immediately, the wanting resumes. A new target appears on the horizon. The chase begins again, and the person moves through life in this state of perpetual dissatisfaction, always almost arriving, never quite there, never fully present, never genuinely at rest. Osho said this is not a moral failure. It is not weakness. It is simply the inevitable result of living inside a program rather than inside your own awareness. The robot can never be satisfied because satisfaction is not something the robot is capable of experiencing. Satisfaction requires presence. Genuine joy requires awareness. And the robot, by definition, is operating on automatic, which means it is never truly present, which means it can never truly experience anything at all. Now let us go deeper into something Osho spoke about that most spiritual teachers avoid, because it is deeply uncomfortable, and that is the way relationships become robotic. The way the most intimate, potentially the most alive dimension of human experience becomes, for most people, just another layer of programming. When two conditioned human beings come together in what they call love, what usually happens is not a meeting of two authentic selves. It is a collision of two sets of programs. Each person comes with their history, their wounds, their needs, their strategies for getting those needs met, their fears, their defenses. And the relationship becomes a kind of unconscious negotiation between all of these programs. Each person is reacting not to who the other person actually is, but to who their own history tells them the other person is. You see your partner through the lens of every person who came before them. You react to them with the reactions that were grooved into you by experiences they had nothing to do with. This is why, Osho observed, people often find themselves having the same argument in relationship after relationship. It is not because they keep choosing the wrong person. It is because they keep bringing the same program. The setting changes, the characters change, but the play is the same, because the playwright is the same unconscious set of conditioning running the show from behind the curtain. And this is heartbreaking in a particular way, because what human beings want, what they hunger for more than almost anything, is genuine connection, real intimacy, to be truly seen and truly known by another person. But the robot cannot offer this, and the robot cannot receive it. Because genuine connection requires genuine presence. It requires two actual human beings actually showing up, actually here, actually willing to encounter each other without the armor of their conditioning. And this is profoundly rare. It is rare because most people have never examined their own programming. They do not even know they are wearing armor. They think the armor is their skin. Osho extended this observation into the social and political realm as well, and this is where his ideas become particularly sharp and, for many people, particularly threatening. He looked at how human societies function, how they organize themselves around ideology, around nationalism, around religion, around the various isms that people adopt with such fierce loyalty. And he said that these too are a form of robotic programming. When a person says they are a conservative or a liberal, when they say they belong to this religion or that one, when they define themselves through their nationality or their ethnicity, they are almost never doing this through a process of genuine independent inquiry. They are doing it because these identities were handed to them, absorbed from their environment, and then mistaken for the self. And then the mind does something very clever and very dangerous. It builds elaborate structures of logic and justification around these inherited identities, making them feel like chosen convictions rather than installed programs. This is why, Osho noted, people can go to war over differences that, from the outside, appear almost incomprehensibly trivial. This is why people can hate with genuine ferocity people they have never met, people whose lives they know nothing about, simply because those people were born on the other side of a line on a map. The robot does not see people. The robot sees categories. The robot does not encounter reality. The robot encounters its own projections. And societies of robots, societies of unconscious, conditioned, unexamined human beings, naturally produce the kinds of collective madness that history records in such exhausting and bloody detail. Osho was not cynical about this. He was, if anything, more optimistic than most, because he believed that the programming is not permanent. He believed, with great intensity and conviction, that it is possible to wake up. That it is possible, through awareness, through genuine self-examination, through what he called meditation, not in the narrowly religious sense, but in the broadest possible sense of simply being conscious, being present, being awake to what is actually happening within and around you. Through this kind of awareness, it is possible to step out of the robot and back into the human being you actually are. And this is where Osho's teaching becomes not just a diagnosis, but an invitation. He said the beginning of all transformation is awareness. Not effort, not willpower, not discipline imposed from outside, not the adoption of yet another ideology or belief system. Just awareness. Just the simple, radical, utterly countercultural act of paying attention. Because here is what he observed. The program runs in the dark. The conditioning operates below the threshold of consciousness. The robot functions precisely because it is not being watched. The moment you bring genuine attention to an automatic pattern, the moment you actually see, with clarity and without judgment, what is happening inside you, something changes. Not because you forced it to change, not because you decided it should be different, but because awareness itself is transformative. Light, simply by being light, changes what it illuminates. This is why Osho was so insistent on meditation. Not as a practice of achieving some special state, not as a technique for feeling better or reducing stress, though it may do those things as side effects, but as a practice of seeing, of watching the mind without being lost in it, of observing the reactions without identifying with them, of becoming, gradually, the awareness that witnesses experience rather than the program that mechanically generates it. He would say, watch yourself, not with judgment, not with the aim of fixing or improving, but simply with curiosity. Watch how you wake up in the morning and immediately your mind begins its commentary. Watch how you encounter another person and your conditioning instantly begins assessing them, categorizing them, deciding whether they are safe or threatening, worthy or unworthy. Watch how a particular tone of voice, a particular facial expression, a particular kind of criticism immediately triggers a reaction in you that feels completely justified, completely natural, but that you have had 1,000 times before with 1,000 different people in 1,000 different circumstances. Always the same reaction, always the same feeling, always the same script. Watch it. Just watch it, without trying to stop it, without performing a different version of it, without judging yourself for having it. Just see it. And in the seeing, something begins to loosen. The automatic nature of it begins to soften. A tiny gap opens, just a hairline fracture at first, between the stimulus and the response. And in that gap, something extraordinary lives. In that gap lives the possibility of a genuinely free human being. Osho spoke a great deal about what this kind of awakening actually feels like from the inside, and it is important to be clear that he was not describing some exotic mystical experience available only to monks in distant mountains. He was describing something very ordinary, very available, very close. He was describing what it is like to be simply, completely, unreservedly present. He would describe moments that most people have had but failed to recognize for what they were. A moment when you are walking and you suddenly stop thinking, and you are just walking. The sensation of feet on ground, the movement of air, the light through leaves, and there is no commentary, no narrator, no self-consciousness, just pure, alive experiencing. A moment in music when the melody does something that bypasses all your mental defenses and touches something in you directly. And for a few seconds, you are not thinking about anything. You are simply feeling, completely present in the feeling. A moment in genuine laughter, the kind that rises up from somewhere unexpected, that you did not plan, that the robot did not produce, and for that moment you are entirely, gloriously here. Osho said these moments are glimpses of what life would be like if you were not running a program. Glimpses of your actual nature, which is aware, which is alive, which is here. And most people have these glimpses and then return immediately to the program. They do not recognize what they have seen. They do not understand that this aliveness is available always, that it is in fact the ground beneath all the mechanical busyness, that it is what they actually are when they are not being what they were programmed to be. The tragedy, Osho said, is not that people suffer. Suffering is part of life. The tragedy is that people suffer unconsciously. They suffer without knowing that they are suffering, without knowing why, without the awareness that could transform even the suffering into something meaningful. They run the program and feel vaguely unhappy, and fill the unhappiness with distraction, and then return to the program and then feel vaguely unhappy again. And this cycle can run for an entire lifetime without the person ever once stepping back far enough to see what is actually happening. Osho had a particular way of describing the quality of life lived in this automatic state. He called it sleep. Not literal sleep, but a kind of walking, talking, functioning sleep. A state in which the body is moving and the mouth is speaking and the hands are working, but the inner life is essentially a dream, a replay of old recordings, a hall of mirrors reflecting conditioning back on itself endlessly. And he said that most people are born, live their entire lives, and die without ever truly waking up, without ever truly arriving in their own experience, without ever knowing what it is to be genuinely here. He told a story once, in his particular way, about a man who falls asleep on a train. And while he is asleep, the train passes through mountains and rivers and cities, through landscapes of breathtaking beauty, through extraordinary moments of light and shadow. And the man sleeps through all of it. And when he reaches his destination and someone asks, "How was the journey?" he says, "What journey? I was asleep the whole time." This is the human life as Osho saw it being lived by most people. An extraordinary journey, happening in real time, filled with beauty and strangeness and depth and the remarkable ongoing miracle of simply being alive and conscious and here, and most people sleeping through all of it, moving through it in a daze of conditioning, arriving at the end of the journey wondering where it went. Now it must be said, because it is important, that Osho did not offer easy solutions. He was deeply skeptical of any teaching that claimed to make this transformation simple, quick, or comfortable. He had sharp words for the kind of spiritual marketplace that sells awakening as a weekend seminar, that promises enlightenment through a technique you can learn in an afternoon. He said that waking up is the most difficult thing a human being can undertake, not because it requires enormous effort, but because it requires something far more challenging than effort. It requires honesty. Real, unflinching, merciless honesty about yourself. Because the first thing you will discover when you begin to truly watch yourself is how deeply the program is installed. You will see how automatically your mind moves to judgment, how reflexively you compare yourself to others, how your sense of self is almost entirely constructed from the opinions others have had of you, how you have been performing a version of yourself since you were very young, and how you have forgotten completely that it is a performance. How your deepest desires are often not yours at all, but the desires of the crowd, of the culture, of the parents, of the past. And this seeing is uncomfortable. It can be very uncomfortable, because the ego, the constructed self, the persona that has been built up over a lifetime of conditioning, it does not want to be seen. It does not want to be examined. It will resist observation with remarkable creativity. It will generate distractions. It will produce justifications. It will offer compelling reasons why this particular moment of self-examination is unnecessary, why you are actually fine, why Osho was interesting but not really relevant to you specifically. This resistance is itself part of the programming. The robot does not want to stop being a robot because the robot does not know that it is a robot. It thinks that being a robot is being alive. It has no reference point for anything else. But Osho also said, and this is perhaps the most important thing he said, that the very fact that you are asking this question, the very fact that some part of you recognized something in the idea that you might be running a program, the very fact that you felt something stir when the image of the phone being reached for before the eyes were open resonated in some place of recognition. This itself is the beginning of waking up. You cannot recognize the cage if you have never, in some tiny part of yourself, known freedom. The very act of questioning is itself a crack in the conditioning. He was tremendously loving about this. For all his sharp edges, for all his willingness to say uncomfortable things, Osho had an enormous tenderness for human beings struggling inside their conditioning. He understood that no one chose to be programmed. He understood that the child who became the robot was doing the only thing it could do to survive. He never blamed people for their sleep. He just woke them up, or tried to, because he understood that the sleep was costing them everything. It was costing them their lives. So what does it actually look like to begin stepping out of the robot? What are the practical dimensions of what Osho was pointing toward? Because it is not enough to understand this intellectually. The robot is very good at understanding things intellectually and then continuing exactly as before. The mind can process these ideas and file them away and then return to the program without missing a beat. Understanding is not transformation. Insight is not awakening. The beginning of actual change, Osho kept insisting, is in the body, in the breath, in the immediate, physical, sensory reality of right now. Not in more thinking, not in more analysis, not in a more sophisticated understanding of the mechanism of conditioning, but in the simplest possible thing, the practice of actually arriving here, right now, this breath, the sensation of air moving, the feeling of the body resting in this moment, the sounds around you, the light. Not as objects to be processed and categorized by the thinking mind, but as raw, immediate experience. Here, actual. And Osho said, do this not as a technique, not as a practice you perform for 20 minutes in the morning and then set aside while you return to the program, but as a whole new way of moving through life, a whole new way of meeting each moment, with attention, with presence, with the simple, radical, deeply countercultural willingness to be actually here, actually alive, actually yourself. He observed that almost everything in modern life conspires against this. The entire architecture of contemporary existence, the constant connectivity, the infinite scroll, the notifications, the noise, the busyness, the cult of productivity, all of it is designed in ways that keep a person in their head, in the future, in the past, in comparison, in evaluation, anywhere but here. The phone you reach for before your eyes are open is not an accident. It is a delivery mechanism for the program. It is a machine that keeps you inside the machine. Osho would have recognized immediately what smartphones have done to human attention. He would have seen in them the perfection of a system that keeps people as far from themselves as possible, as far from the present moment as possible, as productively conditioned and as efficiently distracted as possible. He died before their invention, but his diagnosis of the mechanism they exploit was so precise that his words seem almost to have been written in response to them. And yet he would not have been despairing about them either, because he understood that the longing for genuine life is indestructible. It cannot be permanently suppressed. It can be buried under decades of conditioning, muffled by distraction, temporarily satisfied by the cheap substitute of entertainment and consumption and social validation. But it does not go away. It waits. In the quiet moments, in the moments between the notifications, in the 3 a.m. moments when the performance drops away and something in you asks with real urgency, is this it? Is this all there is? Is this actually my life? Those moments of real questioning, Osho said, are the most precious moments in a human life. Do not run from them. Do not silence them with more distraction. Do not answer them too quickly with borrowed reassurances. Sit with them. Let them open. Because in that discomfort, in that genuine not knowing, there is the possibility of something real. He spoke about the quality of aliveness that becomes available when the robot stops running. He did not romanticize it. He did not describe some state of permanent bliss or supernatural peace. He described something both simpler and more radical. He described the experience of being fully present to ordinary life, of eating an orange and actually tasting it, of walking in the morning and actually feeling the morning, of looking into the eyes of another person and actually seeing them, not your story about them, not your history with them, not your projections onto them, but them, as they actually are. He said that this kind of presence is what people have been calling happiness without quite understanding what they mean by it, that the happiness they are chasing, the satisfaction they keep trying to purchase, the fullness they seek in achievement and recognition and romantic love and spiritual experience, All of it is a distorted version of this one simple thing: being here, fully here, without the mediating layer of the program, because life, actual experience, actual sensory and emotional and relational aliveness, it is happening right now. It is always happening right now. And the robot, for all its efficiency, for all its tireless operation, for all its sophisticated calculations and elaborate strategies, it is simply never there for it. It is always somewhere else. Always in the past it is replaying, or the future it is planning, or the alternative present it is fantasizing about. And so life keeps happening, and the robot keeps managing, and somehow years go by, and the terrible quiet sense accumulates that something essential is being missed, something important is going unlived. Osho wanted people to stop missing it. That was the core of everything he ever said, under all the provocations, beneath all the controversies, at the heart of all the meditation techniques and the discourses and the silences and the laughter. He wanted people to stop missing their own lives. He wanted people to wake up and see the robot for what it is, to recognize their own conditioning with enough clarity that it could begin to loosen, to discover in themselves the awareness that the program has been running on top of, the alive, present, genuinely free human being that has been here all along, waiting underneath the automation, waiting underneath the noise, waiting in the simplest possible place, which is right here, which is right now. The phone is waiting. The notifications are stacking up. The program is ready to resume at the first opportunity. The world is offering, as it always does, 1,000 compelling reasons to stay asleep. But somewhere, in the quiet underneath all of that, something in you recognizes what you just heard. Something in you remembers, faintly, what it felt like to be genuinely alive. Not yesterday, not in some imagined future when circumstances finally arrange themselves correctly. Now, here, this exact moment, the breath that is happening right now, the life that is happening right now, the extraordinary, irreplaceable, never-to-be-repeated now that is always being offered and almost always being missed. This is what Osho was pointing at. Not a belief, not a doctrine, not a technique, just this, just here, just the possibility, always present, always available, always free, of actually being alive. That is the invitation, and it is always open. It was open when Osho was speaking in Pune in the 1970s. It is open right now, in whatever room you are sitting in, with whatever device in your hand, in whatever chapter of the life that belongs to you and only to you. The robot is very efficient, but it is not you. And the moment you see that, the moment you truly see that, something begins that cannot be easily undone. That is the gift Osho kept offering. Not comfort, not certainty, not a map to somewhere else. Just the mirror. Just the ruthlessly clear, compassionate, slightly maddening mirror, held up so that you could finally, if you were willing, see yourself. Actually see yourself. And in that seeing, begin.